Well, good morning, everyone. Glad to be with you here this morning. I'm Mary Kiffmeyer, and as a Secretary of State for 8 years in Minnesota, I'm coming to you today with that background. But even more important, I was an election judge for 11 years prior to being elected Secretary of State. So I worked in the polling places. So I have personal experience with that work and so appreciate all of our election judges throughout the state of all political parties. Also, I served as chair of state government, and which included elections here in the state of Minnesota in the Senate. So we have legislative background, Secretary of State background, election judge background. I'm here today mainly in the legislative capacity, and my legislators who are here, colleagues with me as well, to say that the current interpretation by the chief election official in Minnesota, saying that only on election day do we give the ballots the full protections that are listed out in statute, but only on election day. So those other ballots prior to election day, they can be left in a vehicle with the back door open, only happening to be observed, left unprotected for 8 minutes. So those ballots that are cast before election day, it seems our current Secretary of State thinks that those ballots aren't deserving of that full protection. It's only for election day. That is absolutely ridiculous by common sense and by legislators. Why do we think we would pass laws and take that care for ballots? But in the whole section of the chapters of law, clearly it is meant that all ballots, every corner of the state, from Lake of the Woods down to Worthington, all of these ballots should be accorded that same degree of security and protection. This should never, ever happen. And if those same approaches, the same methodologies that were there on election day, which require that 2 election judges from different political parties escort and are with those ballots, they have chain of custody, they sign off from each point where somebody new takes the ballots. That kind of chain of custody, party balance is a protection for the votes, for the voters, for those ballots. So if that had been in place, that picture would never have happened. That would never have happened. And so I'm calling on the Secretary of State to immediately change his opinion, and not just because it's legislatively correct interpretation, but it's just plain common sense. Just can't imagine that anybody would even think that this set of ballots could be treated with this level of integrity and security, but these not. And especially in this day and age where so many people are casting absentee ballots early, all throughout the state of Minnesota. They absolutely deserve that. But I want to also make a call to all the voters. We have the duties and responsibilities in the system to guard or protect the ballots and to implement the process in a fair and honest way. But to you, the voters, your duty, your job is to come on out and vote. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever that party or non-party may be, for everybody in this system, this is election day. And election day and our 46 days that we have now is when the people govern. So the government of the people happens on election day. And so it's your duty and your responsibility to come on out and vote. So both of those, challenge to the Secretary of State and all county, city, township, wherever you may be, to choose common sense and choose the best interpretation of Minnesota law and give all ballots equal protection. And by the way, federal law under the Help America Vote Act requires that there be equal protection. And so let's make sure that here in Minnesota, common sense, federal law, state law, we use that to the fullest of our discretion. And meantime, everybody is flooding to come out and vote. We're so grateful for that. And thank you to all of our election judges who are working in the polling places. We value you, we appreciate you, and we need you more than ever. Thank you. Now I'm going to have Senator Cran speak as a legislator as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm State Senator Mark Cran, represent Senate District 28. I've had the privilege to be serving on the state gov and elections since I arrived here, and for the last 2 years serve as the minority lead on the elections committee for the Senate. And to reiterate what Senator Kiffmeyer just said, is we've been splicing hairs about, is this a polling place or an early absentee voting location? Actually, every interpretation should take a common sense interpretation, is that every single location that collects a ballot, touches a ballot, opens an envelope, counts a ballot, should be treated as a polling location and every level of integrity that we put into it. And our intent is we have bipartisan ballot boards, we have election judges, we have poll challengers, every single step, and in this case, chain of custody policies and procedures should take common sense practices to ensure everybody has great faith in our elections. And so what we're calling on is the Secretary Simon to take the lead and make sure that that interpretation is correct and common sense to ensure every voter trusts the system and all actions are in place to ensure that. So with that, I'll turn over to the Minority Lead, Representative Torkelson.
Hello, Paul Torkelson, State Representative District 15B, and very happy to be here. First, I want to thank former Secretary of State Mary Kiffmeyer for taking the time out of her busy retirement schedule to help us highlight this very important issue. You know, Minnesota has great pride in its voter turnout. We often lead the nation in voter turnout. But that voter turnout is enhanced only when we have voter and ballot integrity. The integrity of our ballots is so important. These recent lapses in the way ballots are handled and other issues surrounding our elections reduce voter confidence. I'm here to encourage voters to make sure they show up in spite of any doubts they have in the integrity of the system, cast their ballot this election, and vote, vote, vote. That's what Minnesotans do, and that's what we should always do. It's our responsibility.
Thank you. I'm David Hand, Chairman of the Minnesota Republican Party, and I want to thank my colleagues for their work in calling attention to this. I think this is the third time in the recent several weeks I've been in front of the press talking about instances of failure on the part of the Secretary and the Democrats to enforce the laws and to make sure that the processes that we have are being administered faithfully and fairly. We think this is a problem. I think as Republicans, Democrats, all of us ought to be concerned, number one, that we encourage every person who's qualified and legally eligible to vote, whether it's the same day of the election or whether it's prior to an absentee ballot or early voting. We want to encourage every eligible voter to vote. But we also want to make sure that we take care that the ballot itself is being protected, that the process itself is secure, and that only eligible voters intend to vote. Now that process, I think, has been damaged in recent, or that confidence in that process has been damaged in the recent history here by some of the actions or failures to take action by the Secretary of State and the Democrats. And so we want to call on not just the Secretary, but the Democratic Party and all citizens to make sure that our laws are executed faithfully, and secondly, that we restore confidence in the ballot, in the process with all citizens. It doesn't help, frankly, when you have a legislative majority that passed, for maybe the first time in our history, a partisan election bill in the last session. That is not a good thing. And we hope the Democrats will not do this again in the future. And we hope that the Secretary will take these last few instances, and this one especially today, to assure voters and to make sure that the laws that we have are being followed, are being executed faithfully and fairly. And let's all work together to restore the confidence in the election process with all citizens. And so I also want to thank, we've got some folks here, the Deputy Chair of the Republican Party who's been our liaison to the election security, and we've got someone representing the Trump campaign here in Minnesota also interested in making sure that we have integrity in our election process. The party has spent an unprecedented amount of time recruiting and trying to deploy election judges, members of ballot boards, poll challengers, and so forth across the state to make sure that there is high degree of confidence in this process. And it is not helpful when our Chief Elections Officer, Secretary Simon, is not taking the care that we think he needs to take care to administer those laws faithfully. So at this point, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, sir.
All right, so you've talked about this chain of command,
Chain of custody.
Chain of custody, sorry. Can we just kind of unpack this? I mean, we got this van. Do we know, was it one person driving? What do we know about how these ballots were left? Was somebody trying to bring them to City Hall and trying to get in the door, and that's why they left it open? What do we know? And did they follow the chain of custody?
Well, I would say the main point of chain of custody, one person hands off to another one, so that is an unbroken chain. And in general, they also have a log for the chain of custody, which means I sign, this is what I delivered to you. I sign, this is what I received. That's that chain of custody. As soon as you have, and nobody around those ballots, those are transfer cases, and one of the transfer cases does not even have a tie on it. It appears to be unsecured. But the big thing is, it is totally open. And so that chain of custody, if it were even being used at this particular time, was completely broken. And so that's, right now, we do have video from Edina City Hall that shows to the back of that vehicle. But not only that, this private citizen who took this picture, this private citizen happens to be an election judge and was going in to vote because he will be working in a different precinct. So I needed to go vote in ahead of time. He just happened to be there, but he recognized the look of transfer cases, which maybe a regular person otherwise wouldn't notice, but he did. Not only did he notice them, he took the time to take a picture, but then out of his concern, he stood there for the whole time and guarded the ballots. He stood there for that whole time to make sure that nothing was messed with under his watch and that he was there. So even though the system didn't, he did himself as a citizen, and we're really grateful for that. But the city has said that the ballots that were there were brought in. They've done some checking to be sure that what was supposed to be there was. We're going to take them at their word, and especially because we had a regular citizen who was an election judge stand there and guard them during that period of time. The question is how many other times. But right now, the big thing is we're calling attention to it. And the big thing is to have the Secretary of State, instead of making this little interpretation but only ballots on Election Day, that's nonsense. That's absolutely ridiculous. All ballots, 100% of them, deserve a chain of custody, deserve election judges from 2 different political parties. And both parties, they've recruited election judges. They're there, they're ready to work, they're ready to go. They just need a phone call. They're ready to do that work. That's that standard that the Secretary of State now is saying only for Election Day is just ridiculous. It should be all ballots. And I'm calling on him to change and to use that for all ballots starting today, and that we have that as a standard for Minnesota. And that's what I think is most important, is to have that, and that chain of custody goes with it.
Senator, Hennepin County election officials say that's a significant ask of election judges to have the pairs of judges with those ballots in a full 46-day early voting period. I am curious, what is your reaction to that? Is it too much to ask of those individuals?
Absolutely not. Being an election judge myself for 11 years, we love election season. We love doing our job. And we go through a period of time when there aren't the need for election judges, but then this window of time, yes, they are absolutely ready to serve and to be called upon. I remember when I was Secretary of State, and we had 9/11, and what a tragedy, and it was on Election Day. And Governor Ventura and we talked about that a little bit, but the main thing, I checked with the counties. I said, check with your election judges. We got these things going on right now. Are they ready to hold their post? Are they ready to still do they feel okay? Are they secure? Everywhere across the state, the answer was yes, we are ready to do our job. And if they were ready to do that on 9/11, my goodness sakes, on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I think they're just as ready. They love doing this work, and yes, they are ready to do that. And by the way, of all the things that government does, running a good election is one of the most important responsibilities. And so it is worth that effort.
Can I jump in here real quickly, just in response to your comment? A week or so ago, we had called attention to the fact that the Republican Party had provided a list of 1,500 election judges, people willing to be election judges from the Republican Party to Hennepin County. They called on none of them to staff their absentee ballot boards. So there are a lot of people who are willing to do this work, but I guess the question that you raised, I think, begs the question of, are we passing laws that are not administratable in a way that guarantees that the security of the ballot occurs. And if that's the case, we ought to change the law. But I believe that Senator Kiffmeyer is correct. We have people who are willing to do this. We, I think, unfortunately, have a Hennepin County who doesn't seem to be too willing to take advantage of the resources that we've offered.
Can I ask this question? I kind of want to ask it. I want you to answer it from two different sides. One is that guy who worked for Hennepin County didn't work for Steve Simon. Simon called him enough on it, as I recall. He was fired, but not by Steve Simon, because Steve Simon doesn't employ him, the county does. So I want you to, it seems like you guys want to blame Steve Simon for a lot of things that aren't his job. The flip side of that same question is, why isn't it his job? Why does the state have such a decentralized election system? Dozens and dozens of counties and even cities running elections that maybe should be the state's purview.
Well, the issue that we're here today is to use common sense. He is, the Secretary of State is the chief election official. I mean, that means something. And any county who hires somebody comes under the laws that are required to be done. So it doesn't matter if Hennepin County hired somebody or they were an employee, they hired a courier or whatever they did, they're still liable, they're still responsible. And Steve Simon is still the Secretary of State, the chief election official. We don't break that sense of responsibility just because Hennepin County hired a courier. But again, it's just common sense. All ballots, the interpretation should be all ballots deserve equal protection, whether it's election day or it's the days before. That's really the primary issue that we're here for today.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
y'all didn't sue Simon last week, right, whether it was a suit or not. You sued Hennepin County because they're the ones who are responsible for doing those judges.
You can amend it.
Why are we talking about the Secretary of State right here when we should be talking about Hennepin County election?
Because what we want in that case is we want to make sure Hennepin County, as a county, is following the law, and we think that they are not. Now, to Senator Kiffmeyer's point, and I agree with her, Steve Simon is the chief election official. And the question really for him is, what kind of training, what kind of work has he been doing through the course of his administration to make sure that the county administrations and the other administrations across the state that are responsible for the local conduct of elections are doing it according to law? I know when I spoke last week that Deputy Chair Bergstrom and I, we wrote letters to all the jurisdictions across the state calling attention to the process that the law requires and how we do elections. I don't know if Secretary Simon does that. I don't know if he does training routinely with these folks to make sure they understand what their duties are. The things that former Secretary Kiffmeyer is talking about is he have an interpretation of the law that permits these kinds of things to occur? If that's the case, he needs to change that interpretation.
And exactly, that is why I am here, because I heard the Secretary of State making the statement that it is for Election Day only. So he is the one who set that standard of Election Day only. So that is why I'm taking him to task for that, because I don't believe that is a correct interpretation of the statutes. But even then, common sense certainly says that all ballots should have equal protection. But he is the one who made that statement, and that's why I've included him today, as he rightly deserves, as the chief election official. Even still, lawsuits are different. You will have parties to lawsuits. That doesn't absolve anybody else of responsibility.
Can I ask the legislators, why do you have such a decentralized election system? We know there are other states that don't do that.
Well, that's a bigger issue, I think, for another election day and another election bill. But we're right now in today, not in the future. We're in today right now. We've got, 10 days to the actual election day of November 5th? All right, this is what we're focused on right now. Do the absolute best for all ballots, equal protection for all ballots. Hennepin County, you have a duty to call those Republican election judges. They were given to you, and your choosing not to use them is contrary to Minnesota law. And so they are there. That's a challenge to the system. But in the meantime, the challenge is to all voters: use your duty and responsibility, and yours is to come out and vote.
Are either of our legislators future looking, or do you just want to talk about?
Sorry.
So locally, to me, is the best place to have that work done. When you think about election integrity, election judges, ballot boards, and all of the people who provide the oversight, in our own community, we know each other. And the actual ballot processing, this mail-in ballot processing, actually does challenge that. Actually, all of the work should be done in a local precinct to bring the highest level of integrity to the entire election process, regardless of whether it comes in the mail or vote in person on the last day of the election season. And everybody should be treated, because think about poll watchers and all of those things about who do they know? They know their neighbors, and it's run and provided oversight. One, we want party balance, so we have great oversight, and that's where it needs to reside. To remove that local control and to put it up to a higher level, I think it would be further degrading the entire process of true election integrity, brought to and managed by the people, for their neighbors, with their neighbors. I think what we're asking is Secretary Simon should be standing up with us and making a proper interpretation that every single policy that involves a ballot, regardless of where it's accepted, every election day poll location, policy, statute, and law should be the same. They may look different, but they should be the same. Custody of ballots, in this case, they should have party balance and election judge. Yeah, it might be hard, it may be difficult, but that's an obligation to us to make sure each citizen knows their vote counts and the integrity is at the highest level. So.
Any other questions from?
If I could just add, Mary, a number of changes were made in state statute this last biennium to improve access to the ballot, to make it easier for people to vote, and that's good in general, but it was not coupled with the changes in statute that would also increase our level of integrity, to make sure that these changes in access didn't result in discrepancies in how these ballots are handled. And so that's where I believe the legislature will need to step in the future, evaluate what's happened this election cycle, and make the changes necessary to make sure that ballot integrity is a priority.
Thank you very much, Representative Torkelson. Well, thank you all very much for coming today. We appreciate your time. And again, the system owes it to the voters to protect all ballots, no matter when they are cast, no matter where they are cast. And also the duty of citizens is come on out and vote. Thank you very much.